Welcome to another reading in Theological German. We are still going to do a couple more things here with this Stein's article before we move on for just a break on some other stuff. We've been looking at this article here on the interpretation of Exodus 19:6, and we've been down in this section on the semantic functions of the construct chain Mamleket Kohanim. I explained at length in the last episode what a construct chain is in Hebrew and what the kind of relevance of the question is that Stein's is addressing here. And we went through this first group here of subjective genitives, and so now we're going to move on to the second group of adverbial genitives. So within the second category of genitives, adverbial genitives, okay, and this is again, these are different categories of the kind of relationship that might exist between the two nouns in the construct phrase, kingdom of priests. Okay, so the first one in that category would be the objective genitive, and Stein describes this using the same exact structure as what we saw in the previous episode for the other two descriptions above. So he says that in the objective genitive, the second element indicates the object of the, so here you have again your genitive article, but then the noun that actually goes with it is way down here at the end, and this is what I've been calling a heavily modified noun, or what April Wilson calls an overloaded adjective. I wonder what Germans actually call this. If you just were like, you know, a German kid, like in the 5th grade, learning German grammar, how would they describe this construction? I actually have no idea, but in any case, we know what it is, and so you find that noun and you kind of work with that to get your sentence sounding normal in English, right? So the second element indicates the object of the action. I should say, we saw this up here as well, this word action. The reason why we're talking about an object of action is because you can't say object of the verb because there is no verb. Kingdom is a noun, or, you know, however you translate it. Rule is a verb, but in this context it would be functioning as a noun. So you can't have an object of a verb because there's no verb, but there is some kind of action implied within the noun, and so that's where you're going to have action that can have some sort of object, which would be the case for an objective genitive. So the whole idea is that, let's just finish translating this here. The second element indicates the object of the action expressed in the first element. Okay, kind of interesting to note here that there are a whole bunch of synonyms because, you know, he kind of keeps saying the same thing in terms of how he's designating the first and second elements. And so up here he talked about the something that was bezeichneten, so which is to say indicated or described action. Here he's talking about expressed action. And he's using bezeichnen instead here as the indicative verb, talking about the second element. And so these are all kind of synonyms. You know, he doesn't want to sound too pedantic or repetitive. So you have another one there, genannte, which could be translated as named. But they're all really doing the same job in each of these little bullet point sentences. He's just trying to use a variety of expressions. So that's why you have this new one he brings in down here, ausgedrückten. So he's now going to express instead of naming this time, or instead of indicating, or whatever the case may be. And then, of course, you have the example here for this one. Okay, so this is all these little examples, and we saw this above here as well, and down here. These examples are indicating kind of like a paraphrase of the translation Kingdom of Priests that gets at the sense of this kind of relationship that's described in each of these points. So for the objective genitive, what you're basically saying is the divine, he puts that in brackets just for clarity, the divine royal rule over a people of priests. So the point would be kingdom of priests in this way of interpreting the relationship between the nouns. Kingdom of priests would be, well, it's God's kingdom where God rules over a people, and those people are priests. And so in that sense, it's a kingdom of priests. And finally, we have the third category of genitives, the adjectival genitives. The first of these would be the attributive genitive. And that is a situation where, as Stein says here, the first element, so kingdom is the first element in our phrase, the first element is characterized through or by the second. Notice here you have werden when you have a complement at the end of the clause, which is where these complement verbs always go. It is a participle, so you know it's passive. If it had been infinitive, you would have to translate this as a future construction, but it's passive. So the first element is characterized through or by the second. And notice here too that you have elision, that doesn't say the second element or part. The word Glied here is not repeated as it was in previous sentences, previous bullet points. So you kind of just have to notice that. It's easy to notice in your own language, but it might be a little confusing when you're looking at German just because of the way you're processing it. So you just have to kind of be paying attention, and you're going to see that it's just das Zweite. So that two there, the little numeral, is actually the noun. And that's all you get. Anyways, the example that he gives here, or the paraphrase, I should say, to expand on this, is to just show that really kingdom of priests in this reading would mean something like a priestly rule or kingdom. And the whole idea being that it's a kingdom that has the character of being priestly. So, and that's kind of what you get in the Vulgate, which is what this other little note here is with this Latin, that it's a priestly kingdom. And finally, we have the genitive of genus, which Stein describes as a situation or a relationship where the second element, drückt aus, which is the same verb we saw earlier in participial form, but here it's separated because it's in the conjugated position. So it's ausdrücken is the verb. Pardon the terrible pronunciation. Anyway, it means to express or something like that. So the second element expresses, and then you have here, I think for the first time on this channel, maybe we've done it once before, a vo compound. We've seen lots of da compounds. Vo compounds are less common. Da compounds I like to handle. You will know if you watch all my videos, you will know that I handle da compounds by kind of really woodenly just turning them into an English compound that is very similar, where we take the word there and attach it to a preposition. So we say things like thereby, therein, therewith, we might even say in certain contexts. And so you can do the same thing with the vo compounds. You can just render them very woodenly as a where and a preposition. So we say things in English like whereby, wherein. We even say wherewith, archaically anyway. And so you can do the same thing here. You could say where through or whereby might actually just be fine. You could say whereby. So let's just try that for a second and say the second element expresses whereby the first element is constituted. And so because it's normally when we use whereby like that in English, we kind of have some other word that we're modifying. You don't have that here. And so the whereby actually becomes kind of the object of the verb almost, ausdrücken. And so it's basically saying that the second element expresses exactly, it is through the second element that what it is that constitutes the first element is expressed. And so you might say something like, the second element expresses that which constitutes the first element, or something like that. And so you also have here a passive construction. I want to just comment on this for a minute because it's been such a long time since I've done videos, and this is just a good reminder. Wodurch here is going to be introducing a relative clause. And in relative clauses, the conjugated verb shows up at the end, okay? And so wird is the conjugated verb, though it's at the end of the clause because it's a relative clause. When wird, or werden is the sort of lexical form, is the conjugated verb, then you are looking for a complement, which is either going to be infinitive or participial. I suppose you might have no complement, in which case you would just translate it as become. But typically you have a complement, and complements normally show up at the end of the clause. But since this is a relative clause, the conjugated verb already took that spot, sort of jumped to the head of the line, as it were. And so the complement has to kind of get into the next best position, which is second from the end. And so that's your complement for werden, and you see that it's a participle, and so you know it's passive. If it had been infinitive, this would be future. So that's where you get the passive construction from. Just a good reminder on German word order, which is pretty consistent, which is, well, at least in written German it is, and that's very helpful to us. The little paraphrase that we're given at the end here says a kingdom of which the members are priests. And so this is kind of a relatively rare use of this type of genitive pronoun, where you say of which the members are priests. So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, this sounds like the objective genitive in a way, the kingdom of priests. The difference, I guess, maybe, I'm just going to read Stein's mind here, but the difference between this genitive of genus and the objective genitive is that the objective genitive really depends on the action implied in the first word. And so you can talk about the objective genitive being something like the group of priests over whom God rules is really the idea there. Whereas in the genitive of genus, it's more like it's a kingdom that's just constituted by priests, and the ruling aspect of kingdom is not so much in view, but rather the constitution of the thing. And so in other examples, the genitive of genus and the objective genitive might be more obviously different, but it's just because I think of the particular concepts involved here that they seem sort of the same in this particular case. Anyways, next time we'll get back to a couple more full sentences to finish off what we're going to do for now with this article. And otherwise, I hope you found that helpful. Those last couple episodes with the bullet points and the kind of abbreviated expressions and things were probably good practice. And have a good week.